talk going. So,
will now be recorded.
okay, I can see Uma, you've recorded it. Perfect. And yes, here we go. So, tigers, their past, present, and sadly, their uncertain future. So, a little bit about myself, just to know who is giving you all this information about our tigers. I mean, there are a lot of people who are qualified on tigers. There is a lot of people who are doing the research. There are a lot of people who are working towards tiger conservation. Um, what I'm basically doing is collating all that information put together along with a little bit of my own field experience to try and put it across in a very simple manner so that everyone can understand and appreciate the realities and difficulties of conserving such a large cat in a country like India. I mean, I'm sure most of you are from India, and you will know the problems anything in our country faces to take shape and to get to its final form. And tiger conservation is one such thing. So, like Dr. Umar said, I am a naturalist. Just to give you an idea of what a naturalist is, I'm basically a wildlife guide. I started off as a wildlife guide. I take people on safaris, I take people on walks, I interpret nature for them. So, basically, our job pretty much is to understand all the complicated scientific knowledge to the best of our abilities and make it in an interesting format so that a person can come and connect with nature. I generally don't work with tigers all that much recently. I did work with parks associated heavily with big cats in the past, but my interests lie in habitats and lesser fauna, birding, frogs, snakes. But to start with, I didn't want to, me and Dr. Umar were discussing, and I don't think we wanted to start off with frogs or snakes. But definitely the story remains the same, whether you take a mosquito or a frog or a snake or a tiger. The story of conservation, the realities of conservation remain the same in our country. So let's start with some tiger which most of you can relate to, most of you can understand. And for those who don't also, I'm going to have a little bit in the initial sections so that people can follow what we are talking about in the latter sections with regards to biology and conservation. So here we go. So, how many of you know that I would request everyone to mute their audio. I can hear some echoing. It'll be great as soon as you come in to mute your audio and use the chat because uh, uh, it's that. Use the chat if you need to. Yeah, great. So now that's fine. So, how many of you actually know that there were 9 subspecies of tigers in Asia? So these are the 9 subspecies. It's an artwork done by Rohan from Green Humor. I'm just using it for the sake of the presentation. So amongst the 9, you can see that some of them are in gray, which is the Caspian tiger, Javan tiger, and the Balinese tiger. That means they are extinct. They don't exist anymore. At the same time, you can see the South China tiger in the middle of your frame. That is also extinct officially right now. So we are left with 5 subspecies of tiger: the Siberian tiger, the Indo-Chinese tiger, the Malayan tiger, the Sumatran tiger, and of course our very own Bengal tiger, or what people refer to as the Royal Bengal tiger. Okay, so today we are going to talk about the Bengal tiger, which we get in India, and simply because that is probably the most spoken about tiger in the world, the most numerous, and the tiger which actually shows signs of positivity in its story of conservation. All the other tigers are still in limbo. There's still a lot of doubt about their numbers. There's still a lot of doubt about their future. But here, in the case of the Bengal tiger, we actually have a plausible situation where we can actually uh, go out and talk about it and maybe have a future which may look bright. It is a situation which can still be fixed. So this is India. So everyone knows this is India. But do you know where the tiger actually lives? Do you know where tigers are found in the extent of India? I mean, that is a question. A lot of you may know it as Mudumalai or Bandhavgarh or Ranthambore. These are just names, but do you actually know where tigers existed as a free-ranging animal in India? The truth is, tigers existed almost throughout India, except in the cold deserts of the Himalayas and the hot deserts of Rajasthan. They were otherwise found all throughout the country. Just to give you a few examples, of course, tigers are associated as animals of the forest. Here you have a beautiful picture of a sal forest from Corbett, but any kind of forest which has a good prey number, tigers are found there. Interestingly, do you know that this picture of the tiger that you see, this is a camera trap image. A camera trap image is basically an image which you get by placing a remote camera in a forest trail, and anything that crosses it is automatically captured. This image of the tiger is from the Western Ghats of Goa. I'm not sure how many of you are aware that there are tigers in Goa. So tigers actually are found in rainforest, thick mountain slopes of Kerala, Karnataka, Goa, all the way to southern Maharashtra, but I'm not sure they exist there anymore. But that was areas where tigers are found. Another interesting landscape where tigers are found is the foothills of the Himalayas, the floodplains, what we popularly know as Kaziranga or Dudhwa or Pilibhit and all those areas. Here, tigers roam along with elephants and rhinos in the floodplains, where the Brahmaputra and the Ganges come down from the Himalayas and flow as broad rivers, creating these lush floodplains. Tigers are found over there. One of the most extreme examples of tigers adapting to interesting habitats is, of course, the Sundarbans. Who would imagine tigers in our coastal saltwater habitats? I mean, these are mangrove forests in the Sundarbans of India and Bangladesh. You have them in southern West Bengal and Bangladesh. And tigers are found in good numbers there. How they've managed to survive there, I'll get to in a bit. This is the other extreme. This is tiger. This is not a Siberian tiger from Russia. This is a Bengal tiger from within Indian limits. This is from Arunachal, where tigers have figured out a way to thrive in snowy, high altitude conditions. In fact, I don't know how many of you came across this news article. This is a record as of now, where a tiger was found at 12,000 feet in Uttarakhand. That is kind of the altitude where you look for snow leopards, and tigers are found there, which is quite amazing. I'm talking about forests, I'm talking about floodplains, I'm talking about mangroves, I'm talking about high mountains, and of course, I'm talking about now deserts. In the deserts of India, which is basically your Aravalis and Rajasthan, which is considered to be dry desert scrub forests, you still have tigers. So tigers. And it's all the same species. You're not talking about different kinds of tigers. They're all the same tiger. And they have managed over the years to adapt to these varied environments, which is quite amazing. We all talk about leopards as being adaptable cats. Leopards are found in Bombay. They're found in tea estates. Tigers are also found in quite extreme conditions and different kinds of habitats, which is quite amazing to think that such a large cat, which requires so much space and so much specificalities of habitat and the conditions, is found in such a varied environment. How did they manage to do that? I mean, we know they're found here, like as we just discussed. But how do actually tigers thrive in such a varied environment? One of the things is, again, comes down to their adaptability. So in this picture, you can see a tiger killing one of its preferred prey, which is sambar and other kinds of deer. Spotted deer, sambar, maybe wild boar, things like that. But when push comes to shove, tigers will take anything. Here you have a picture of a tiger taken in Corbett. I'm not sure who this is by. This is from an image from Facebook, which I came across. This is a tiger killing a rhesus macaque, a monkey, which is basically a snack. But a tiger, if push comes to shove, will be able to even scavenge or eat already dead animals to survive. So all the myths that tigers will only hunt to kill and all of those things aren't true. They will, if they need to survive, they will go for even. In fact, there are records of tigers feeding on fish and turtles in Sundarbans, which is quite amazing to think. It's not something which we normally associate with tigers, but it's true. It's been recorded officially. And on the other extreme, we were just talking about monkeys. Tigers have been recorded feeding on elephants, hunting and feeding on elephants and rhinos and wild buffalo, all the giants of the Indian subcontinent, including our what we popularly known as bison, which is actually the Indian gaur, some of which can weigh about over a ton. A tiger can bring them down and feed on it if push comes to shove. So that is kind of the range of prey species that a tiger can take on. So if you can imagine a tiger in the high Himalayas feeding on barking deer or musk deer, and in the Sundarbans feeding on fish and turtles, and in areas like Kaziranga where they are faced with other giants in the same forest, they will definitely go for rhinos, as you can see in the picture to the right by Sandesh, and elephants if necessary. So based on whatever we've seen till now, the only two factors that define a tiger being in an area is habitat quality and prey base. If you're not familiar with these terms, habitat quality is basically the kind of forest, the health of the forest, how much water it has, how much of protection it has. All of those things come under habitat quality, and prey base is basically the number of prey species like deer, wild boar, monkeys that a particular forest supports. And these two factors heavily define the presence of tigers. How they define is the next slide. So territories and sizes. So for an animal like a tiger, tigers are territorial cats. It's not like lions where multiple tigers can coexist. They can, but they have these defined boundaries. Like for example, in a place like Kanha National Park in central India where I worked, tigers, a female like the one you see to the left would hold about 10 to 15 square kilometer, because Kanha is very, very rich in prey base and habitat quality. So it has dense salt forests, it has perennial rivers, it has water bodies, it has grasslands. So it has a lot of water, a lot of forest cover, a lot of deer. So a female would hold about 10 to 12 square kilometer roughly. But a male that you see on the right, a male like that, you can see he's almost like twice as big as a female. He would hold something like 40 square kilometer to 50 square kilometer. So a territory of a male is defined by the number of females that he has within his territory. So usually a male will have about 2 to 3 females within his territory. That shows that ensures that his gene pool is spread wider during his lifetime. So that is kind of how the habitat quality defines the number of tigers in a place. So if you have a very good habitat quality and a very good prey base in an area of 200 square kilometer, you may have 8 to 10 tigers. But at the same time, if the habitat quality is not good, like for example in a place like Goa or the high Himalayas, a tiger may hold something like 200 square kilometer or more, because it has to rule over a bigger area. I don't like to use the word rule over, but just to give you an idea, it has to control a bigger area to have enough prey in its range to survive. So that is kind of how habitat quality defines the number of tigers. So when we talk about territories, tigers don't fence off their territory saying, oh, I'm putting a fence here saying this is my area. They have invisible signs to define the borders of their territory. So one of which is scent marking, like you can see this female on the left spraying a tree. So those kind of spray signs on the tree actually have a smell which other tigers can recognize and will know that this female or this male is holding on to such and such a territory. And this spray also has additional information. It can even have information on how big the tiger is, how old the tiger is, whether sorry, I'm just having some insects in my ear. Whether the female is pregnant, is she already having cubs, is the male young, is he challenging the dominant male of the area. All such hidden information is found in these territorial marks. Another way is sometimes they scrape the ground, they scratch trees, they have glands inside the digit, inside their fingers, which actually spread the same kind of message. So this is a funny picture. I'm not sure how many of you have come across this. This is a tiger not laughing, it's not smiling. It's something called a flamen response. A flamen response is basically where a tiger puts out its tongue, and it actually has a special organ inside its mouth we call the Jacobson's organ, which takes all this additional information. So when it, for example, a tiger may come towards a tree which has been marked by another tiger and lick it, or even smell it, or put its tongue out like that to get all this additional information. So to give you an example, this is very similar to what snakes do. You know that snakes put out their forked tongue constantly as they move. It is pretty much the same thing. So the snakes are actually sensing, trying to get additional information about their surroundings for their Jacobson's organ. The same thing tigers also do. So they put their tongue out and try to get additional information about their surroundings. So again, a beautiful cartoon done by Rohan. This is kind of how a tiger's social media, or how the scent message is carried out between tigers in the forest. I'll give you about 10 seconds to go through this. Basically, you can see a tiger sniffing and scratching a tree, and then scratching over that other scratch sign to show that this is the dominant male. A female is sprayed on a tree. He knows that she's ready to mate. He may spray on top of that to send the female the same message. So there's a lot of complicated social dynamics of tigers. So one of the most beautiful ways to put it is tigers are solitary, but they're not alone. So it's actually gives you a lot of ideas about how tigers live. They are cats which live by themselves, but they're never alone, because every tiger knows what the surrounding tigers in the area are doing or are up to. So it is actually like an invisible social network of the forest. So the vocalization, this is a picture. This is kind of how a lot of people associate tigers roaring. You know, they have this vicious face and they roar. It is not true. Tigers actually have a very mellow way of roaring, except that their vocal cords are so powerful and their sound carries through a huge area. Probably at the end of this presentation, I'll play that video also for you guys, because I'll have to unshare this screen and share a video separately and come back to this. So at the end of the talk, I'll play a video of a tiger roaring in the forest. It definitely doesn't look as ferocious as this. It is actually not something that tigers don't do often. Tigers don't roar as much. Like, for example, for those of you who've been to Africa, you can hear lions roaring all night or in the mornings and evenings, because in the plains, they're more dependent on their vocalization to establish connections with other prides of lions or other lions within their pride. For a tiger, it is not as much, it's not as necessary to vocalize. They're very quiet animals, very secretive animals. So most of their job is done by these sense signs. But during, let's say, a female calling her cubs, or a male roaring to find a female, or a male challenging another male, that is the usual rare occurrences where you can actually hear a tiger growl in a forest. So another aspect of social life of tigers is, of course, the females with cubs. So tigers can give birth to 2 to 3 cubs on an average, and these cubs usually stay with the mother for about 3 years. Usually the males are sent away from the family faster at the age of 2, while the females stay with the mother usually for 2.5 to 3 years. And on some occasions, which has been recorded, the female cub is actually allocated a part of the mother's territory by the mother so that she can thrive there. So generally females actually come into maturity earlier, because they actually get their territory earlier. So I've actually seen females which are 3 years old mating and giving birth to cubs. Whereas with males, they take about 5 to 6 by the time they become their full size and get their own territory. They come into sexual maturity officially a lot later. So males, probably you can see them dominant at the age of 5 or 6, whereas females, as soon as they leave their mothers, sometimes they get their own territory as a part of their mother's territory, and they're able to survive there. So this is a very special image that I came across from Pilibhit, which is next to Dudhwa Tiger Reserve in Uttar Pradesh. This is a female with 5 cubs. If you can look closely, you can see all 5 cubs in the frame, which is a very, very rare occurrence, and which actually shows the sign of good habitat. You know, it has been seen that tigers, when they are in a very healthy habitat like Pench also or Kana, they give birth to 3 or 4 cubs, or sometimes 5 cubs. Whereas tigers in areas with not such a good habitat. There was a record of tigers breeding at the edge of Ranthambore. They usually give birth to 2 cubs, maybe 3, because I don't know if this is a fact, but people say they're able to control their birth cycle based on the habitat quality. This is again a hypothesis. I'm not sure it's been proven, but this is what we have seen. So a good number of cubs generally shows that the habitat is healthy, there's a lot of prey, and she is confident that she can bring about at least 3 to 4, if not all of those cubs to adulthood. Another actually interesting fact about females giving birth to a lot of cubs is the fact that she knows that there is a dominant male in the area who will protect the cubs during their lifetime as long as they have the mother. So let's say the female actually relies heavily on the male to make sure that her cubs are safe. Because if the male is defeated by another male or a challenger male comes and takes over, the first thing he will do is to kill the cubs to mate with the female again to make sure his gene pool is spread. So it sounds kind of cruel and evil, but actually it is a good thing in some ways because it ensures that a new DNA is brought into that tiger population. Let's say, for example, a dominant male and a female are in a particular area for 10 years continuously or 12 years, then you can imagine that if they give birth 3 times, then you'll have 9 or 12 different tigers with the same DNA in the area. Whereas if that is broken halfway through, even if it involves killing of young cubs by the new male, you will have half the later generation with an entirely new gene pool or a DNA, which is very, very important to ensure that the population of tigers in an area is healthy. So yes, so as per whatever we've seen till now, we have seen the tigers are use scent signs, they're moving in the forest. They're overall very secretive animals. They don't roar much. So how is it exactly that we go looking for tigers? I'm sure a few of you may have gone for tiger safaris, but I'll just tell you a little bit about that in any case. So this is what we rely on when we go into a forest looking for tigers. So we know that cats in general have soft pads to make sure they don't create much of a noise when they're walking through the forest. But that ensures that the tigers also use the forest roads and dry stream beds to walk through the forest. So they are creatures of habit which will use set trails within their territory to move around. So if you walk in a particular forest for a while, you will know that so-and-so tiger prefers so-and-so routes to get from A to B. So they're actually quite predictable animals. But on that particular day, to locate a tiger, we use things like the tracks, as you can see to the image to the left, and we also rely heavily on sounds. So the prey animals like deer and monkeys give out a lot of what we call alarm calls or warning calls in the forest when they see a big cat. So you can actually see the image on the top, the tigers walking away and the deer are actually looking at the tiger and calling. They aren't running away because tigers hunt by ambushing their prey. When they have been seen by the deer or a monkey, they cannot kill them because the deer are faster and they can run for longer than the tiger. The tiger kind of relies on getting close to the prey animal without the prey animal noticing it, and within a few jumps it needs to catch it. If it doesn't do that, then it can't kill the prey. So when a deer actually see a tiger, we've actually seen instances where they keep following the tiger and giving alarm calls. So alarm calls actually serve 2 purposes. They tell the forest that there is a tiger around. They tell guides like me and tourists that there is a tiger around. But what they also do is they tell the tiger that he has been seen, he or she has been seen, so that it knows that if it's trying to make an attempt to kill, it is futile. But there is another aspect to tiger tourism in India, which is of course the summers. A lot of you might have heard people saying it is good to go to see tigers in March, April, May. It is true in a way, but it's not entirely true. Tigers are seen well through the year. There's no specific time. But one unique behavior of tigers is they prefer to cool off in water bodies in the summer, because in the summer temperatures in some parts of India, all of you know, can get above 40 degrees. So for an animal with so much fur, it can get really hot. So they do have to cool off in the hottest parts of the day in water bodies. And like I said, they are creatures of habit. So they will prefer to come to certain particular water bodies to cool off. So they're actually a little bit more predictable in the summer months. But there is another twist to this. All of you must have heard that cats don't like water. Cats kind of run away when they get wet. They don't prefer to get wet. So why is it that tigers do this? So tigers and jaguars, possibly fishing cats, are three animals which actually willingly take to water. So the theory with tigers is that during the last ice ages, they actually were forced down from the northern latitudes to the Indian subcontinent and other parts of South Asia. And when the ice retreated and the globe started warming again, they were not adapted to the warmer temperatures within India. So they still managed that by cooling off in the hot summer months in waterholes like this. So this is actually a hypothesis. It's a theory. It has not been proven. But amongst all the theories, I think this kind of makes sense to give an explanation to why tigers sit in water during the hot summer days, whereas a cat like a leopard or a jungle cat or a lion doesn't do so, despite facing the same temperatures. So when the tiger is so adaptable, it is so widespread, can kill anything to survive. It can survive in any forest with a little bit of prey also. Why is it that we are facing a tiger crisis these days? It's a question that has always bothered me. I've kind of wondered. So all of you must have heard the story of the British hunting out our tigers throughout their time. The British and of course our Maharajas inviting them to hunt the tigers to make sure they keep their kingdoms and keep their foreign guests entertained. So a lot of tigers were shot during that time, but there was still a method to the madness of what they did. So it has always kind of bothered me as to why tigers were the number kind of says that in the turn of the century, India had over 10,000 tigers or 20,000 tigers. Then why is it that we have only in the 1970s we had 1,400 tigers left in India, which called for a huge awakening? So a part of the story is, of course, the Maharajas and the British hunted tigers heavily. But what actually happened was, there is a beautiful book called The Lonely Tiger. It is written by a British officer who lived in India after 1947 in the village of Piparia in central India, where he actually says that after independence, India was suddenly faced a new crisis of feeding 350 million people, which is kind of the population of our country at that point. So food security was given preference over everything else. People were given licenses to clear any patch of forest, shoot any animal to make sure their farming was secure. So between 1947 and early 1970s, a lot of our forests were destroyed to ensure there's enough crops and enough fields happening in our country to feed our new population. And this kind of was actually the dark ages of for the forest in India, not just the tiger, for any animal that lived in the Indian mainland forest. This was the dark ages. Animals were shot at indiscriminately just because they were pests feeding on their crop. Everyone was given gun licenses to shoot wildlife in their farm. So a lot of things happened in that time which we generally don't speak about. We are conveniently blaming it on the pre-1947 era. But the truth is, a lot of the destruction happened after 1947 till 1972. And in 1972, thank God for Indira Gandhi. I'm not going to speak about everything she did, but one good thing she did was she listened to this crisis and brought about the Wildlife Protection Act of 1972, where she created tiger reserves in areas which still held a good number of tigers. So parks like Bandhavgarh, Kalakad Munnadurai, Mudumalai, Ranthambore, Kanha, all these parks that you hear about today were established as tiger reserves with central government funding and additional protection in 1972. So what this meant was these areas will become inviolate for development for people, and they will just be spaces for tigers to live in. And that is kind of what the Wildlife Protection Act established. And what it also did was it enabled for the first time scientific studies of tigers. So in the initial years, our biggest question was, how many tigers do we have? We knew that roughly the tiger numbers were dropping, but no one knew how many tigers we had. So the initial survey was done by people sitting on machans, elephant back, And there was also a methodology which was used, which is now pushed aside, where people were, someone believed that tigers can be identified by the shape of their pads. You can see in the bottom left image to the bottom left, that's a tiger pug mark or the pad when it walks in a forest path. So by just taking a plaster of Paris imprint of that pad and comparing it with a different pad, people believed they could identify individual tigers. And the people entrusted with this job were forest guards who had probably a day or two's training to go take these plaster of Paris impressions and identify tigers. So it was a very flawed methodology. Some of them may believe tigers can be identified by their pad, but it is actually a very scientific process. You can't identify it just by one pad. You need all 4 feet. You need to know the distance between each pad to know how big the tiger is. You need to understand the kind of substrate the tiger is walking in. A pad will look deeper and narrower in a wet substrate, but in a sandy riverbed, the pad will expand. So a lot of these factors weren't considered to count the tiger numbers. So tiger numbers were heavily flawed, but still a lot of good studies were happening about tigers. People realized, in fact, whatever I spoke about in the earlier slides were all studies which came, were all results of the studies which came about in these times, where scientists went and worked in these tiger reserves to study tigers. But this man in the bottom image is Dr. Ullas Karanth. He came up with a new way of identifying tigers. Like how we have our fingerprints, which are unique to each human being on the planet, tigers have a stripe pattern that's unique to each of them. So when I say stripe pattern, we're not just talking about one side, one image, or just the face. I'm talking about the face, the left flank, and the right flank of tigers to positively identify tigers. So he set up these camera traps, which are remote triggered cameras on forest paths, which would take a photo of any animal which walked through the forest or in front of the camera. So suddenly we were actually getting very accurate numbers, not just of the number of tigers, because each tiger was individually identified. We were also able to get information on their age groups, whether a female had cubs, whether there was a new male in the area, whether there's a new female, what their territories were. A lot of information were accurately available just by this simple change in the counting methodology. So this is the new way, camera trapping, and the new number says we have 3,000 odd tigers. I think that's kind of the number which we are talking about nowadays. But the camera traps also reveal some very interesting information about tigers. Do you know that we actually have black tigers in India? So the 2 images on top are from a particular tiger reserve in Orissa, where they found 16 tigers who were totally dark. They're excessively striped, and no one actually knew that this population existed till the camera trap or the remote camera images revealed these secrets about tigers that we didn't know. And the image to the bottom is not a camera trap image, but it's the exact opposite. It's a white tigers, 2 wild white tigers in the tea estates and degraded forest of Upper Nilgiris, just above Ooty, if you can believe that, where a female had given birth to 2 cubs, 2 male cubs, both of which were white in color. There's a lot of debate on whether they're actually albino, but they're just leucistic or white for practical purposes. So interesting facts of tigers like this were revealed by camera trap studies of tigers, which we didn't know. And a lot of the forests were inaccessible in the day and night. So it was easier to go set up a camera trap, leave it for a month or 2, and then going and collecting the information later from the images stored in the camera traps. Another interesting thing about stripe patterns, I thought I should share this image just to break the seriousness of the talk. This is a male tiger from Kanha, and he became very popular. He was a very bold, dominant male tiger, but he became very popular because if you look at his forehead, you can see the words CAT written. I mean, it is not very obviously written, but if you actually look closely, you can see CAT on his forehead. So he is actually a male tiger which had CAT written on his forehead. So stripes work interestingly that way. So if you actually just look closely at every stripe pattern, I'm sure you'll find a word somewhere. But this is quite obvious. So I thought I should share the image about a stripe pattern of tigers. So now we are talking about this news article to the left, 33% rise in tiger numbers in the last 4 years, which is now jumped from 2,200 to 3,000 tigers. We are getting news like that nowadays. But you also have a news like the one to the right. I want to say that both of this is by the same print media, Indian Express. The one on the right says we have too many tigers now in one particular district in Maharashtra. What do we do with them? And the one to the left says is celebrating the increase in the number of tigers. So in a country like India with 1.3 billion people, resources required to feed and give power and give facilities and resources to 1.3 billion people, do we actually have space for more tigers? So like I told you, tiger reserves were set up in 1972, but the foresight of these tiger reserves were kind of very short-lived. Probably they didn't expect it to do so well. Not all tiger reserves did well, I have to tell you that also, but the ones which did well, probably they didn't expect it to do so well. So these are 4 tiger reserves in central India: Satpura, Melghat, Pench, and Kanha, and you can also see Tadoba to the bottom. It's not marked here. So these tiger reserves were actually islands. They were just like forested islands with fields surrounding them and very broken forests and railway lines and roads going on outside all these tiger reserves. So what happens when you have a healthy population of tigers, a healthy habitat which is well protected? So over the last 50 years, you can imagine all the females in these parks are breeding successfully. The cubs are developing, they are becoming adults. But still the tigers require a particular territory to thrive. You know, the females require a territory, the males require a territory, and the young ones will be sent out of their mother's territory at some point. So in a park like Kanha, where let's say the number is 94 tigers, that is probably the maximum number of tigers a park like Kanha can hold. Then what do we do with the new cubs that are being born? What happens to them? So these tigers leave the park in search of other areas to survive, and that is where conflict arises. Most of the news of tigers hunting people or getting into villages or killing cattle are all happening outside parks, in the villages that live outside. So images like this are a recent thing in India, because these tiger reserves like Tadoba, Kanha, Bandhavgarh are actually have excess tigers. So these new cubs that are being born will have to leave the park to find their own spaces. And when they do that, they come in contact with people, because these parks are just like island forests. And when they leave these parks, there is nowhere for them to go. And for a young tiger, which is 3 years old, when it leaves the park, the first place it will go to is to the village to kill cattle, because it doesn't know what else to do. So there are these situations which have come up which question the whole morale of conservation that we have been talking about for the last 50 years in India. We say, oh, we should conserve the tiger, national animal, and all of that. But what happens when conservation is successful? Are we prepared for that? So that is kind of where we are right now. And in a country like India, like I mentioned, 1.3 billion people, development happening at a daily rate, so much of social inequalities. The people who are usually directly affected by these excessive tigers are the poor population that lives, and the tribal communities and the agricultural communities that live around these parks, while we in the cities sit and talk about tiger conservation and that it's a good thing, but the brunt of it is faced by these people and of course by the tigers. As you can see the image to the bottom, tigers are getting killed by roads, they're getting killed by railway lines, they're getting killed by poachers. All of these is actually happening outside the parks, because the forest department is doing a great job in the park, but as any government official, their jurisdiction ends at the boundary of the park. When a tiger leaves the park, it is in someone else's land. It could be in the PWD department's land, it could be the revenue department's, it could be in the fisheries department's land. No, I didn't my charger. It could be anywhere. Quickly. Sorry guys, I'm just having low battery. Just give me a sec. No, my bad. Where's the charger? No, I'll just sit down and talk. Just move this here. Excuse me guys, sorry about that. I've just suddenly got a low battery situation, so I'm just moving to a different place. I'm not sure you can see me as well over here, but yeah. So the brunt of this.
Yeah, we can see your face.
Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay. Great. Yeah.
Okay.
So the brunt of this successful tiger program is faced by all these new cubs that are being born, which leave the park, and by the people who live around these parks. So it begs the question: do we actually need more tigers? Does India actually need more tigers? Does India actually have space for more tigers? Is our actual conservation plan, does it actually have a foreseeable future, or is it uncertain? That is kind of where we are. That is the reality of tiger conservation these days. I mean, there are parks in Northeast India and Orissa and some areas where new tigers need to be. There is space for new tigers, but in Central India and South India and a lot of places, we don't have space for more tigers. So, is there actually a need for more tigers? So, that is a question which we need to actually think about before we jump into the whole gung ho positive talk of tiger conservation. So, is there a solution for this? So, actually, the solution is there, and the solution, interestingly, was shown to us by tigers themselves. So, this is an interesting story of C1, which is tigress from Tadoba. She walked 800 miles between different forests to reach the next forest. And you can see another image of her crossing a highway, and she walked through fields, highways without harming anyone till she reached the next forest patch. So what does it show? It kind of was a. There were other tigers also which did this, but not to this distance. So it kind of was a wake-up call to say that maybe all they need is a safe path to walk, or to walk between these tiger reserves that we have created. And the new term for it is corridors. Maybe all they need is a strip of forest, maybe not an entire national park, but a strip of forest or island forest set up in between these parks, which can act as stopovers for a tiger which is moving outside a park. So let's say every 40 kilometers you have a 2 square kilometer forest patch which is well protected. A tiger can cover it in one night and maybe eventually get to its destination. So this is an interesting event which we witnessed. So this is a tiger which we saw in Kanha. So what is interesting about this tiger is this is a stripe pattern none of us had ever come across in Kanha. So like I said, tigers have unique stripe patterns. So also in a particular tiger tree, family tree, they will all have similar stripe patterns. There'll be small variations, but very similar stripe patterns. But this kind of thin stripes we had never come across. So you can actually see in this picture, there is a tiger to the bottom and the tiger to the top right, both of which have a very darker branch stripe pattern as compared to the tiger in the middle. This was a very interesting thing that we came across, because this male had walked all the way from Pench Tiger Reserve to Kanha Tiger Reserve for like 2-3 months, mated with the female, and gone back to Pench. So he was camera trapped both in Kanha and in Pench in a matter of 4 months. What drove this tiger to do that, no one really knows, but this is what he did. So he actually walked probably for 3-4 days between Pench and Kanha, and there is a fragmented forest patch with railway tracks and villages and fields and roads and people, but he still managed to get from Pench to Kanha and walk back. So there is actually an existing methodology with which tigers can get between these parks and ensure that their survival is possible if we give them that space. So if you remember the map I showed you a while ago with these 4 island tiger reserves, just keep this in mind: Satpura, Melghat, Pench, Kanha and Tadoba to the south. I'm going to show you another map. So the map to the top right shows how, if we can create these green patches between these parks and be sensitive to tiger movement in these areas, tigers will figure out a way. So all the excessive tigers may move from Pench to Satpura to Melghat to Tadoba. So there is now suddenly a network of parks so that tigers can move in between them without coming into conflict with people. They don't do this willingly, mind you. I don't know the kind of audience who are here, but I'd like to kind of stress on the point that they don't do this willingly. They don't enter villages willingly. They don't kill cattle willingly. They don't kill people willingly. They don't want to be seen by us. They prefer to be by themselves. So if you actually give them the space to do that, they will figure out a way to get between these parks and figure out their own way to survive. So that is kind of where we're talking about. So the tiger I was talking about, which came from Pench to Kanha, you can actually see Pench to the bottom left of the image, to the top left of the screen. Pench is to the bottom left and Kanha to the top right. He has actually walked this entire forest patch in between with fields and everything, crossed all these hurdles, come to Kana, mated with a couple of females there, and gone back to Pench. So that is kind of the future of tiger conservation these days. So now people are protecting and studying tigers outside parks and sanctuaries to understand what are the routes preferred by them, what is the age bracket of tigers moving in these corridors, how long do they stay in these corridors, how long does it take them from move from A to B in these corridors. All these unanswered questions will kind of prove to be the solution for us in the years to come when we actually talk about conserving tigers in a larger scale in a heavily overpopulated country like India. Is there actually, all of this sounds great on paper. In the presentation sounds like, yeah, we can actually build these corridors, it sounds great, but is it actually possible? We're sanctioning mines and power plants and dams on a daily basis. So are we actually thinking about building these corridors? The struggle is going to be huge. There's going to be a lot of scientific data that's required. There's going to be a lot of political will. I'm fingers crossed. There's going to be a lot of political will that's required to make sure these corridors are something of a reality in the future. There's going to be a lot of people's will. You know, you're also talking about a lot of people who are living in these corridors. They should be compensated, or they should be sensitized. They should be educated on the reality of these corridors and why they are necessary to ensure the survival of tigers. There's a lot of things. So there is a lot of uncertainty. But the truth is, in all this negativity that I'm talking about, India is the only country which has a viable tiger population in the world. We can boast that despite having 1.3 billion people, we still have tigers in good numbers. We have tiger reserves. We have a good population of tigers that are thriving by themselves. So we've done something right in the past. But the thing is, we have to evolve, which is what we are not doing. So I hope that in the years to come, people will realize that this is the need of the hour, and they'll figure out a way to get these corridors in place so that tigers can actually survive in a better way in the existing framework created by us without creating new forests. So another interesting thing I'd like to say is, we look at a forest and we say, this is a beautiful forest, but no, it has no tigers. Is it actually, after listening to whatever I've said in the last half an hour, 40 minutes, is it actually true? I mean, if it is a beautiful, healthy forest, it should have tigers, right? So if a forest is beautiful and healthy, but it doesn't have tigers, it is a sign that the forest has something missing. It may sound a little crude, but that is the truth. It is not the tiger that needs the forest. It is the forest that needs the tiger. So any forest which has tigers is going to be well protected. It is going to be, it is a sign that the forest has good number of water. It has a healthy population of deer. It has a good ecological cycle in place. So a presence of a tiger in a forest is going to tell us a lot more about the forest. It could ensure a good floral variety. It will ensure good perennial water flow. It could ensure even the smallest of things. All of this stems down from the presence of a big cat. That's why we call it an umbrella species. So remember, it is not the tiger that needs the forest. It is the forest that needs the tiger. I'd like to finish by saying that and open it up for questions. And Uma, if you can just pick some questions that people may have, just maybe put it in the chat box. All of you just type in your questions in the chat box, and if Uma, you can pick out some questions, I'll be happy to take them one by one.
And you can pick out your video in the end to show the roar and end it that way. So
yeah.
the first is, how do you donate to tiger conservation?
Well, there are a lot of, it's a very tricky question. There are a lot of people doing good work. There are a lot of people doing popular work. There are a lot of people doing necessary work. So I'm putting it in these three brackets. Maybe just write to me. I know some scientists who are in need of funding. I always believe donate for a smaller cause and not to someone who's doing big work. Always donate to a smaller cause, because every penny of your money will translate to something much more than just by donating to a huge organization which already has crores of funding. So I will suggest donating to people like who are scientists who are doing good work in these corridor forests, or doing good work on ecology or natural history, or people who are working on the grassroots with the communities which live around these parks. So there are a lot of good organizations which are doing that, individuals who are doing that. Anyone who has questions or any doubts on where or who to donate for, please write to me and I will put you in touch with multiple people. I'm not going to say donate to this person or that person. You can have your own conversations and figure out your own solution. But definitely donate big, but for small causes. I think the smaller causes are what is going to translate to something big.
Okay, I think you partly answered this, but this was a question about can tigers be, since tigers are so adaptable and can live in varying landscapes, do you think they can be introduced into new areas? And
Absolutely. We are
that.
doing. That is what the current government is doing. They are actually manually translocating tigers which are leaving parks to forest patches where there are no tigers, and maybe creating a tiger reserve in a new place. So this is happening in Rajasthan. It is happening in Madhya Pradesh. So parks in Satpura, we had a tiger from Bandhavgarh, we had a tiger from Kana, we had a tiger from Panna. The Satkosia Tiger Reserve in Orissa got 3 tigers from Kanha. But I have a fundamental problem with the manual translocation of tigers, because have you studied the area where you're translocating a tiger properly? So, for example, if you translocate a 3-year-old male into a new area, and there's already a dominant male there, they're going to fight and he's going to die. Or if you're translocating a female into an area, and if there's not enough prey, or if there's not another dominant male in the area, she's going to not be able to breed or be successful in whatever she's been translocated for. So a better way of doing this would be creating these healthy corridors and ensuring that the tigers move organically between these forest patches. What that does is, the tigers, like I said, they can sense these smells and things like that, and they can figure out their own way as to where they feel safe. And if you study these tigers often enough, at some point you will know that tigers are moving from Kanha to this park in Chhattisgarh, or they're going to Jharkhand from Bandhavgarh, or wherever. And that is a better time to uh, figure out this manual translocation, instead of blindly doing it and saying, oh, this tiger came out of Bandhavgarh, so I've shifted it to Orissa. That is kind of what is happening now. 50% or 30% of it is successful, but in most cases, we are losing those tigers at a faster rate. So it is a solution, but it needs to be more scientifically applied in reality.
Okay. So there are 2 similar questions, and I'll put them together. Your view on tiger tourism, especially multiple crisscrossing walkie-talkies and a tiger is spotted, and also does it bother the young ones? This tiger tourism, the huge crowds with the camera.
Yeah. So I'll tell you one thing about tiger tourism in India. So tiger tourism in India is probably one of the best things in a lot of ways, simply because if you and me haven't seen a tiger in the wild ever, we're never going to relate to it. And we're never going to relate to it, and we're never going to be able to appreciate the existence of a tiger. So let's say someone has spent their entire life in Chennai or Bombay in a concrete city. They're not going to care if a new dam is going to be or a new mine is coming at the edge of Kana or Bandhavgarh or Mudumalai, because they'll be like, yeah, what the hell. But if they've actually gone and seen the forest and a tiger in the wild, it is going to have its benefits. It is a fact. Another fact is that most of your healthy tiger populations in the country are in parks where there is good amount of tourism. You can also argue saying it is the other way around, because their parks have a good number of tigers, that is why there's tourism. No. To have a sustainable number of tigers over the last 40-50 years, like Ranthambore, Kana, Bandhavgarh, Kabini, which is Nagarhole, Bandipur, Mudumalai, it is also having a lot of attention from the common man. So, for example, if a tiger dies in one of those parks, someone will file a PIL. It could be a wildlife photographer, it could be a conservationist, and a lot of the park is also being patrolled every day by these tourist jeeps. So there is a lot more eyes on these parks than relying entirely only on the forest department. So tourism has its benefits, but on the flip side, we have kind of executed tourism, wildlife tourism in India, as a friend put it, very similar to how we go see Taj Mahal. It sounds very stupid, but that's the truth of it. So if you what you do when you go to see the Taj Mahal, you buy a ticket and you want to go see the Taj Mahal and come out. That's kind of how your approach to seeing the Taj Mahal is. Take some photos of it, take some pictures, and then come out. But unfortunately, in India, when people go to a tiger reserve, they say they buy a ticket and they expect to see a tiger. And that is how our wildlife tourism is centered. So you have a 3-hour safari, you go into the park, you look for tigers, find these tigers, take photographs, and come. But unfortunately, this is not likely to do. Tourism to create new forests out of forests which weren't there in the past. So there is a lot of tweaking that's necessary to make our tourism more animal friendly and tourist friendly and more educational than just something which is going to feed your ego. You just want to come back and say, I've seen a tiger. No, it has to have an impact on you. It has to have a much more lasting impact on a person and an educational impact and an emotional impact, and not just something that gives you good stories to talk about in your weekend with friends. And coming to the other part of the question where we say, does it disturb tigers? So most of the tigers in our tourism zone have been there for 30, 40 years, and they've seen jeeps and people for 30, 40 years right from the time they're cubs. So most of these tigers are habituated or they're used to jeeps and vehicles. Sometimes they don't even care. They will walk right up to your jeep. So I believe that if the drivers in the park and the guides are sensible, there is enough space for tigers and tourists in these parks. And even the cubs, they don't care after a point because they see their mother being comfortable with jeeps. They will also grow up to be comfortable with jeeps. So it is very rare that someone sees a shy tiger in a tourism area. But it can't be said. The same can't be said about a tiger which has not been used to jeeps. So it is. I definitely wouldn't use the word disturbed. But yes, there are instances where some jeep drivers and guides do not follow the ethics, and they give in to the pressure by the tourist and do excessive things just to get closer to the tiger. So if you keep to your boundaries, definitely they are comfortable and they're not disturbed. I hope I have answered your question.
Yeah, I think that was quite clear and addressed both aspects of that question. Someone wanted to know if the health of these tigers monitored and is there intervention if they're sick or get an infection within the forest?
Yes, they are monitored definitely in all these tiger reserves, but I feel they monitor too much. I think a sick tiger deserves to die. I think a tiger which is injured deserves to die. So a lot of these cases, what happens is popular tigers, they're also kept alive by the forest department because they get very sensitive when a tiger is sick or dying. But what happens is, suddenly you bring a tiger which is in the process of dying back to health. It causes a lot of conflict, like I told you, in the social dynamics of tigers. So you are artificially keeping a tiger alive when it is actually supposed to die, and a new male tiger or a new female is supposed to take its place, and you're still artificially keeping this tiger alive. What happens is you're disrupting territories, you're disrupting the dynamics. You may even cause the death of cubs because this tiger still has this instinct to go and kill a cub, whereas he is actually sick and old. So
Yeah.
I believe being monitored too much and people get too emotional about the topic of tigers, in which case you should be monitoring every deer which is sick and dying, which you don't do, right? So what gives the tiger the right? I believe you have to be scientific in your approach and not emotional in the process of monitoring tigers.
One question about the relationship of the villagers who live around these these reserve forests and the tiger itself? Is there harmony? Is one
See,
question, and some to that.
yeah.
Uh, I mean, the clearing or cleaning of the reserves itself. I mean,
Mhm.
are the forests also monitored? Like, are they de-weeded? Is anything done inside by the people? Is that also monitored?
Okay, so this is two very, very separate questions. So the first one, I wouldn't say they live in harmony. There is no harmony between wildlife and people. I don't believe there's any harmony. There's always only mutual respect and understanding. The tiger figures out a way to live amongst people. The people figure out a way to live amongst tigers. So that is kind of how it works. Um, in most cases, the tiger will avoid a man or anything to do with artificiality. But in a rare occurrence, an old tiger which has lost its canines or is injured may seek easier prey. So that is the time they come into the villages to kill cattle and all that. But in most other situations, a tiger will definitely avoid human beings to the best of its abilities. And of course, the people will like to avoid tigers, which is a no-brainer. But talking about villages at the edge of parks, every park actually has a buffer zone where people are allowed to live. They're allowed to cut wood. They're allowed to graze their cattle. It's like a multi-purpose use area at the edge of tiger reserves. So this area is very vital because it creates this transparent buffer or area between where people and tigers can actually expand into, and none of their lifestyles are actually disrupted. Because you and me have created this tiger reserve and the border for it, but a tiger may decide my territory extends a little outside it, or it may say my entire territory extends outside of it. So tigers in these buffer zones still exist. They live amongst people, but if they were actually vicious and dangerous, you will be hearing of people dying every day. That is not the case because they know how to live amongst people. Most of the tigers will be excessively nocturnal. They'll be secretive. They'll be less vocal. There's a lot of realities to tigers in outside protected areas, and the people also, they will know. Most of these people will know when to go into the forest, what to be aware of, where not to intrude into the tiger space. So there is a lot of it like that. Coming to the second question of forest management, again, forest management happens. There is de-weeding done every year. How effective, I'm not sure. There is a lot of de-weeding done every year. There's a lot of budget to maintain the roads in the forest, to maintain the fire lines, to maintain the grasslands. There is a lot of activities in the forest, but I'll leave that answer for another day because it's a very, very vast topic on forest management, and I don't think we'll have time to answer all that today. But yes, it does happen. It does happen. Yes.
Okay. There is also a question about tigers in captivity. Again, I don't know
Yes.
if you want to do that, but do they retain their instincts?
No, definitely not.
Okay.
Definitely
So,
not. Tigers in captivity will not be able to survive in a forest, which because their basic instinct, most of them are unhealthy. They're either sickly or they're overfed and fat, and they don't retain any of their natural instincts. Because you have to realize most of the tigers' learning is during the time they spend with their mother, hunting and territories and reacting to different other animals, reacting to people. Everything is learned from their mother. So a tiger which is suddenly thrown into a national park from a zoo, the first thing it will do is seek out the nearest village, and it will cause chaos. So I don't believe there is any point of releasing zoo-bred tigers into the wild. But another interesting initiative by the Madhya Pradesh department is where orphaned cubs are kept in an enclosure inside the forest. I'm not sure about the success rate of this, but they have been kept in enclosures inside the forest where they are monitored regularly. There is a lot of deer inside these, and when I say enclosure, I'm talking about areas which are as big as a 1 square kilometer. So they roam free in these areas. They're monitored. They hunt over time, and maybe those tigers are ready to be released into other forest patches. But again, the success rate of this is yet to be shown on paper. So it is still a big question mark.
Okay, thank you very much. Quite a few people want to hear the video, see the video. and hear the roar.
Okay, so for that, I'm going to unshare my screen, and just give me a second. I have to go out and reshare a new video. Just give me a second. It's a very small video. It's only about 12 seconds, but a beautiful video, which I'm sure you might find interesting too. So I'm going to reshare my screen now. Please confirm that all of you can see it. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Can all of you see the screen?
Not yet. Now we can.
Yeah. Okay. Now I'm just going to play this video. I'm not sure how many of you could see that video properly. Uma?
No, I don't think it came in a very broken fashion. Like
yeah, I'm not sure how videos work in.
I think bandwidth.
Yeah, but you could hear it, right?
Not. I mean, it was very clipped.
So I'll probably attach a YouTube link to this on the chat for those of you who want to see it. I think that may make sense.
Right. And on the chat, if you can also put in your contact coordinates, because there are quite a few questions about where you do your tours, how to reach you, etc.
Yep. Okay. So I'm going to put the Tiger Roaring on the. I put it on the chat. And for those of you who want to know about how to contact me, I'm going to put my last screen back online. 1 second. So here in the bottom, you can see. I'm not sure. Can all of you see my screen now? Anyways, I'm just going to type it in the chat. You can also see my Flickr, my Gmail, and my YouTube. For those of you who wish to know more about what I do and where all I work. And I've also left my email on the chat. So basically, the whole point of showing this video is that when most of you think of tigers roaring, you all think they look vicious and evil. It's actually a very normal looking thing, and they do it so effortlessly. But the sound can actually reverberate for miles in the forest. So it's quite an amazing thing to listen to. So if you actually get to hear a wild tiger roaring, it's quite special. Yeah.
Great. Okay, that's fantastic. Thank you very much, Surya. I think there's a lot of appreciation there on the chat box for the talk.
Okay.
Excellent presentation. One of the best talks on tigers I've heard. Many things there. So thank you very, very much. And hopefully we'll get you back.
Thank you for the opportunity. It was good fun talking about all these things. I hope people will join in. Finally, all these people only who make a difference.
Need one on snow leopard. Need one on snow leopard.
Yeah, sure. Anytime. We know.
Okay. Last question, Shanti. Go ahead. What is your question? Can you speak about snakes as well? I guess he can pretty much speak about anything that you want him to speak on. But I have a question.
Anything related to wildlife.
When is your book coming out?
The South India one is going to come out in August, September mostly, just as soon as the printers are back online. And thanks to the delay because of all the companies shutting down, We are waiting for the printers to come back online, and hopefully August, September seems like a reality. But for those of you who wish to know about the other species found in the forest, we have our old book on Central India. So I'm just putting the name there. And those of you who wish to buy it can either buy it from our Facebook page or Amazon. That's the name of the book. If you type that, you get a book with 2 tigers fighting in the cover of the book. And that actually has all the species of butterflies, snakes, frogs, dragonflies, birds, and mammals in Central India, which is all the way from Ranthambore to northern Maharashtra, Madhya Pradesh, parts of Chhattisgarh, southern UP. All of those areas are covered in that book. So that will give you an insight into what other creatures live alongside the tiger in their forests.
Okay, there's one last question which has to be from a doctor who's a fetal medicine specialist. When there are cubs in the same litter, are there identical cubs in any given?
Well, like I said, I don't think the concept of twins is the same as what we understand as humans, as in human babies. But in tigers, yes, there is a lot of similarities between cubs. Like I mentioned, tigers within the same family tree retain some traits of how they look, their body proportions, their stripe patterns, but there will always be slight differences between the stripe patterns. They will never be 100% identical. So yes, there are similarities in features. So if you actually, like when I worked in Kanha, after a point you could tell, if you see a new tiger, you can say maybe this tiger is from that family of tigers, maybe this tiger is from this area. So you can actually say all of that, but definitely not 100% identical.
Okay. Okay. All right. Thanks a ton. Thanks very much. And thanks to all of you for joining in the evening. And hopefully we'll get one more talk from him soon, and I'll keep you all posted. Yeah. Thanks very much, Surya.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Uma. Thank you for this.
Yeah. Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.